Deadpool and Wolverine just dropped in theaters and is getting a lot of buzz, but where do I rank it among all of the X-Men movies? Welcome to the channel, I am Budster Brown, here to offer casuals and critics a perspective on cinema. Today I'm ranking each movie in the X-Men franchise, including the recently released Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, while some of my picks are sure to land where you'd expect, I do have some unconventional placements that might have you guys scratching your head at times. But I would also love to hear your X-Men hot takes down below in the comment section and let me know, what do you think is the most underrated movie in the X-Men franchise? Now, without further ado, let's get into my 2024 ranking of every single X-Men movie released. My number 14 is X-Men Dark Phoenix, which centers on Jean Grey's transformation into the powerful and uncontrollable Dark Phoenix, threatening to tear the X-Men apart. Now, I know I said I had some unconventional takes. This is not one of those unconventional takes. Everyone knows that X-Men Dark Phoenix was not a good movie upon release and is not a good movie now. And while there's a lot of things that just aren't good in this movie for sure, I would say the worst part of it is that it is just boring. Has no style, or as the kids would say, this movie has no sauce. It is so bland and forgettable. Going along with the idea that it felt like no one cared about this movie is the lackluster performances from pretty much everyone. I think another thing that just makes this movie bland and forgettable is the action sequences. It all just feels so cookie cutter and underwhelming. And you could have more grounded action scenes that take place in more realistic settings and still have this emotional magnitude and make it feel raw and gritty. It doesn't feel like that in this movie. They confront Jean at her childhood home, where she has a battle with the X-Men, and they try to do the slow-mo thing with Quicksilver and all that, but it just comes off as lifeless. Quick spoilers for Dark Phoenix if you ever see it, but Mystique randomly just dies on like a fence post or something because she accidentally gets blasted back. This is how they're killing off the character, and it just feels so low budget, and like they just showed up to film somewhere. There was almost no thought into the locations. They take the characters in questionable directions. Charles Xavier in this movie is kind of an a-hole. Well, I do think it's an interesting idea that Xavier is letting the fame get to his head, and he likes having the president on call, and he likes that people like mutants, and so he's jeopardizing his own X-Men's lives when they are more likely to not survive a mission to save a human being. At some point, I am like, bro, you are so conceited, and it just felt like too much of a jump for this character. It's hard for me to see this version of Charles ever being the Patrick Stewart version of Charles. Overall, it is just a pretty sucktacular movie. However, in the sake of fairness, I do think it has some good qualities. I actually liked the musical score in this movie. The theme that they had for the Phoenix or Jean Grey was really effective, and it had this very eerie sort of guitar riff that I thought fit the mood really well. Near the end of the movie, there's also this train fight where Magneto and the X-Men are joining together to help save Jean Grey from this weird alien race that's trying to steal her cosmic powers, and I actually thought that fight on the train was pretty good. Ironically, while this might be the worst movie in the X-Men franchise, I actually think it is the best version that we get of Cyclops in all of these movies. I actually felt a bit of chemistry between Scott and Jean Grey in this movie, more due to Ty's performance than Sophie Turner's, but Cyclops was pretty good, and it's shocking for me to say that because he sucks in almost every other movie. But despite a cool fight scene and a good version of Cyclops, X-Men Dark Phoenix earns itself an E rank.
Barely made it.
Moving on to number 13, though, we have X-Men Apocalypse, where the X-Men face their most formidable adversary yet, the ancient and powerful mutant Apocalypse, who seeks to destroy the world. Now, this goes without saying, this is an automatic upgrade from X-Men Dark Phoenix. However, it's still not great. I do think that it has some cool things in there, but it's overall just a really messy and unfocused movie. Biggest problem is I think the villain Apocalypse, Oscar Isaac played Apocalypse? Breaking news, Oscar Isaac played Apocalypse. Bro, I thought it might have been that guy who played freaking Gargamel in the Smurfs movie. Not his best performance, I'm gonna be real with you guys. I just never bought him as sort of this dark mutant savior coming back from the dead because his delivery just sounded kind of goofy. When they added a bit of a voice filter over him, I thought it was a little bit better. But when they don't, he just comes off as a wuss. I'm also a little iffy on Magneto in this movie. Sure, I think he's better here than he was in Dark Phoenix, but he also just feels like he doesn't have much to do here. And if you know me, I love Magneto. Got my little, check it out, my Magneto action figure right here. Look at this guy. It's pretty awesome. I also don't like Jennifer Lawrence Mystique in this movie. She just feels kind of prideful and arrogant, but not in a way that's likable or believable. It's just snarky, and a lot of the movie follows her, so that's just unfortunate. But there are a lot of things I do like in this movie. I think they have a lot of action scenes that work. They do some cool stuff with Colonel Stryker, a younger version of him. Get a cameo from a certain three-clawed maniac. Also, once again, a little unnecessary in the overall plot of things. You have another Quicksilver slow-mo action scene, which is probably my favorite scene in the movie. Sure, it's broken as heck when he does it, and it's also a rehash of Days of Future Past, but I actually probably like this one more than the Days of Future Past one, and it's one of the most fun parts of the movie, so I give that a little bit of a pass as well. You also get introduced to a young Nightcrawler in this movie, which is how I'm also used to seeing him outside of X2, where he's a little bit older, so it was fun seeing that. But overall, just a super underwhelming, messy movie with a lot of plot threads that were trying to be focused and interconnected, but it just didn't work, and it has a distinct lack of energy and nuance with a lot of its talking points that I feel an X-Men movie needs in order to be higher up on this list. While I certainly didn't hate this movie, I didn't really like it, and I don't think I'll ever watch it again unless I'm doing another X-Men ranking video one day. So X-Men Apocalypse earns itself a D rank.
Huh. No problem.
My number 12 is New Mutants, which introduces a new generation of mutants who must confront their fears and powers while trapped in a mysterious, secretive facility. This movie got crapped on so hard when it released in 2020, and that was actually not my experience with the movie. New Mutants was actually the first movie that I saw in theaters after the pandemic hit. I knew the movie wasn't great, but I was just happy to be in a theater again, and it was so much fun watching it for the first time with a couple of friends. Going back into it, I was like, you know what? This movie's probably horrible. I was probably just riding the high of the theater experience, and I watched it again and I still didn't hate it. For starters, I think the performances in this movie are actually pretty solid. Blue Hunt plays the main character, Danny Moonstar, and I thought she did a great job of being a new mutant that, no pun intended, new mutant, but being a new mutant to this facility that doesn't have full control of her powers or know what they are, and trying to deal with that and make friends, and everyone's kind of an a-hole because they've been stuck in this facility. They're all there for different reasons. I particularly liked Henry Zaga as Roberto in this movie, or Sunspot, because he's a mutant that doesn't really want to be a mutant, doesn't really want to be there. He genuinely is looking for a cure. I liked how they slowly revealed all of these characters, their past, their traumas, and why they're there in the first place. Most of the characters are likable. I think they interact well. They have good group chemistry, and those are just things I can appreciate in a smaller, low-budget movie like this. Another big reason why, though, this movie might be a little bit higher than the other two is because it has a horror flair. And if you know me, you know that I am a big fan of horror movies. I haven't talked a whole bunch about it on the channel, but I just love sitting down, curling up, and watching a good old horror flick. And you might be thinking, you know, Budster Brown, you've really been hyping this movie up. Why isn't it higher on your list? And yes, while I'm gassing this movie up, there is a reason why people have been crapping on it. And that's because the movie isn't well put together. You see, I think it has a lot of great ideas. I am expressing to you the ideas that I think are cool. I don't think the writers had the ability to fully realize those ideas and make them as compelling and cool as I think they could have been. Some ideas just go completely unexplored, and other things are like they're banging you on the head with a hammer. and it can be kind of annoying. Another thing is with the main character, Danny, where there's this whole sort of mystery surrounding her and her powers and why she's at the facility and how all of these crazy things are happening. And it's really obvious. It's not a plot twist at all that she's the one causing all the damage with her powers. We all know what's going on. But the way the movie frames it is that you should be surprised, plot twist. Oh, it feels very unearned. There's also not really any good action scenes in this movie, which I don't think you need, but it is a staple of X-Men. It doesn't go hard enough into any of those ideas to make it work as a full standalone film for me. It's not a horror movie, but it's got horror elements. It's not a drama, but it's got drama elements. It's not an action film, it's got action elements. And so you're just left in this sort of limbo territory of good ideas with none executed to its fullest potential. While I am the New Mutants defender and I love the intimate, more claustrophobic setting, it ultimately is not a very well put together film, meaning that New Mutants earns itself a C rank.
Just made it.
My number 11 is X-Men Days of Future Past, which combines casts from both X-Men timelines in a time travel epic to prevent a dystopian future ruled by Sentinels. I feel like this one might be a little low on my list, so for those who really love this movie, I just have to say, sorry. For the first 2/3 of this movie, I was vibing with it hard. Pause. I think it has a really interesting plot and ideas that it executes really well. I love how the Sentinels are taking over the world. They have the reason why the Sentinels are taking over the world with Bolivar Trask making them. I love how you have two versions of almost every character. You have the first class versions and then the classic cast from the original X-Men trilogy, and having Wolverine be the bridge between them because he's lived so long is just really smart. And one thing I've thought about a ton in my life ever since I saw this movie back in like 2014 is their method of time travel. I thought it was super unique and cool. Essentially what you're doing is sending someone's mind back in time to their younger body so that they can warn people of the Sentinels, and they can never usually do it more than 2 to 3 weeks because it's too much strain on the mind and the body. But Wolverine, who's got this crazy healing factor and has also lived crazy long, would be able to do it. And I've always thought about, what if I could send myself back in time with everything I know now and then use that information to succeed in life? Literally, it haunts my dreams. Think about it all the time. But I just think it's a cool and unique spin on time travel, which is increasingly more hard to do with each new movie trying to tackle it and be like, no, everything you know about time travel is nonsense. This is the real way. And it's like the same thing that everyone else does, but they're just pretending it's different for some reason. This is actually different and unique. And because they combine the casts, it just feels like this celebration of X-Men where you get all these action scenes of the classic cast fighting off Sentinels in the future so that Wolverine can save everyone in the past, causing this event to happen. And because you can travel back in time and people are going to die and you can change that, you're able to kill off X-Men members in sometimes violent ways, and I think that's cool. I also like the arc that Charles Xavier goes on in this movie. Well, I thought they went too far in Dark Phoenix with making him this overly flawed character. This felt perfect, where things at his school have just not been working out. He's been losing students. He's sad. He's depressed, and he's deciding to choose his legs over his mutant powers because he's just that down in the dumps. His character arc of realizing that that's his destiny, that's his purpose, to help people, to help mutants, to use his powers to save lives, I think is really powerful. And I'm glad that Magneto is actually one of the people that helps get him back to that spot. Speaking of Magneto, I think he's really cool in this movie. I like when they rescue him with Quicksilver, who is also the best. Quicksilver's fun. That scene where he slows things down and saves everyone, classic, iconic superhero scene for a reason. It's great. But Magneto is really cool. I like how he's a more aggressive version of the character as opposed to Ian McKellen's older take on him. And I can see how this guy turns into the Ian McKellen older Magneto, who's a little bit more subtle at times, a little bit more calm. This is a more enraged yet still ideologically strong Magneto. Like the take on him in this movie as well. Who I don't like in this movie, and once again, recurring theme, is Beast. My God, this guy sucks. I've always loved Beast ever since I watched X3. I just thought it's interesting how someone who looks like such a monster is this highly intelligent person that spouts out poetic lines and is incredibly well read. This guy doesn't feel like that at all, and he's just a complete enabler of Charles Xavier's bad behavior. What can I say, man? I just don't like him. I also don't like Jennifer Lawrence Mystique at all, and unfortunately, the main bulk of this plot relies on her character because she's the key to whether or not Sentinels will exist in the future based on her actions of trying to assassinate Bolivar Trask or President Nixon or something like that. And it just felt so lame. That whole plot to me, the reasoning behind the launch, I just didn't buy it. And I think the thing that's really barring this movie from getting higher for me, and I know this is going to sound extremely silly, so you're just going to have to bear with me here, is I just don't like the ending. I don't like the cause of what stops the Sentinels from being created for this perfect future. And it's just that Mystique didn't kill Richard Nixon and Bolivar Trask, and that just caused a bunch of sympathy, so they decided not to make the Sentinels. It just didn't feel realistic. It didn't feel like that's the outcome it would lead to, and the movie was building to that, but I just don't buy it at all. And so the fact that that's what saved the future, that's what made everything okay. And I was thinking about how great the movie is, and I just sat there in bed at night like, oh, but that bothers me. And when a movie just bothers me that much right at the end, it just sours the experience for me. This was gonna be top 5 probably, but I just didn't think it stuck the landing. It's really unfortunate because I think it's got really good stuff, but for me, this movie's probably not much more than a C rank.
Just made it.
Before we get into this next video though, I would just like to say if you guys are interested in hearing more about X-Men right now, I did on my podcast with cousin Kyle a season 1 breakdown of X-Men 97. I had a lot of fun making that video and having that conversation with Kyle, so if you guys are interested after this video, feel free to check it out. I'll have a link in the description and right up here in this corner. Moving on to number 10, we have X-Men Origins Wolverine. Yes, I know this is a crime that this is above Days of Future Past. I'm sorry. Which chronicles the origin of Wolverine, the wars he faced, and the experiments he survived. This is the moment where a lot of you have probably clicked off the video. I know I said I had some hot takes, and the fact that Wolverine Origins is higher than a lot of these previous movies has probably got a lot of you scratching your heads right now thinking, is this guy off his rocker? The answer is absolutely, I totally am. I'll explain myself though. I'm not ranking these movies necessarily on overall quality from the most objective lens possible, because that's not always why I watch superhero movies. I'm basing them off of how much I enjoy it, mixed with quality, mixed with rewatchability. It's like this little triangle there, and you have to have all three in order to be really high up on this list. Wolverine Origins, well, certainly a very, very flawed film. I'm not going to argue that at all. Has a lot of stuff that I like, both actually objectively good and maybe for the wrong reasons. That brings me back, and I rewatch this movie all the freaking time. For one, the nostalgia is overwhelming for me. I watched this movie probably when I was like 6 or 7, and I thought it was the coolest movie ever made. When Wolverine blew up that helicopter and was walking away in slow motion and there was an explosion in the background, I thought, wow, this is like the coolest moment ever. Now, I still like that scene for completely different reasons, but I still like it. On a more objective note, I think the opening scene in this movie is actually really good. It's one of my favorite X-Men scenes of all time, when Wolverine and his brother Victor are going through all of these different wars, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam. I just think that that's a cool thing to watch happen. And it's not super long, but I do think it's super cool, and I think about it a decent amount. I also really like Gambit, played by Taylor Kitsch in this movie. I think he's got a cool attitude that fits the character very well. I like his showcase of powers. He does make some questionable, weird decisions when he randomly assaults Wolverine, when Wolverine is assaulting the guy that he knows is evil. But besides that, I just liked the character, and I thought he was entertaining. I also think that the musical score in this movie is really good. The theme is super powerful, abrasive, warlike. Going back to that opening scene, when it plays over that, it sounds super based, baller. love it. I also think this movie on paper has some really cool ideas. I like the fact that Wolverine's in this Black Ops group. I also like seeing Wolverine go through the Weapon X experiment, getting his adamantium claws and bones. I also like the idea of a brotherly relationship between Victor and Logan and how that sort of affects them, the little bit of the rivalry they have, a little bit of the scars from war that they have. I think that's a cool idea, and I think they execute that okay enough. I also like that it's the only one of the solo Wolverine movies where Logan isn't completely nerfed. This is prime Wolverine, fresh with the adamantium. I do like that a lot. I think that this movie solidly executes a fair bit of their ideas, but it also solidly destroys a few of their ideas. Because this movie has got a lot of dumb stuff. The action in this movie is super fun and also super dumb. Wolverine propelling himself off a motorcycle to destroy a helicopter and then exploding it and walking away in slow motion is ridiculous, but it's fun. Things that I just don't enjoy in this movie is the love story. It's pretty bad. It's forgettable. I don't think the chemistry's totally there at all. That could have just, gone away. Deadpool's mad questionable in this movie. He's, I do have a little bit of defense. I know people aren't gonna want to hear it. The fact that they at studio thought that this was the best way to introduce the character, it's hilarious that they thought it was a good idea when it was so clearly a bad idea. Now, for the sake of this story, I think Weapon 11 has this physical presence. Logan and his brother have to team up to fight. Works fine. It's just the fact that it is not Deadpool. They literally seal his mouth shut. I don't know what people were thinking at all with this one. Maybe they thought it was too goofy, but he has freaking adamantium swords that are super freaking long. Like, how would that fit in his arms? Doesn't even make any sense. So there's just a lot of stupid things with it, but as a physical threat, I think he works just fine, and it is massively helped out by the fact that in 2016 we got the proper version of Deadpool, who rightfully so makes fun of this version, so it's not as much of a sore spot as it would have been if we never got that version. This movie is a bit of a mixture of, yeah, it's really bad, but I really enjoy it, and hey, that's actually kind of a cool thing. This movie is not good. It's goofy, over the top. A lot of their ideas aren't executed really well, but I do think it has cool ideas, and I cannot deny how much I enjoy watching it, which means X-Men Origins Wolverine earns itself a C rank.
Just made it.
My number 9 is X-Men Last Stand, which raises the stakes as the X-Men face a potential cure for mutation and a vengeful, resurrected Jean Grey as the Phoenix. Now, this movie has an infamous reputation for being bad, another trilogy where the third is the worst installment, and yes, it's true that this is the worst installment out of the classic X-Men trilogy, but I don't think it's bad. I'd never thought it was bad. I liked it as a kid, and when I rewatched it recently, I liked it now. To be honest, after I watch it, I'm not 100% sure why the movie has as bad of a reputation as it does. Sure, it's not perfect. I think it's a bit messy. I think it's got issues, but I don't necessarily think those issues make it this horrible, awful movie that people claim it is often. I will get through my main negatives. As I just mentioned, yes, the plot is a little bit scatterbrained. I think the movie really slows down in the middle where not much happens. The side plots are kind of dumb. I didn't really care about Angel at all. He didn't really fit into this movie that much. The whole Kitty Pryde, Iceman, Rogue, love triangle, bull crap, I was like, why is this in the movie? You could take this out and almost nothing would change. And yes, poor Cyclops was done so freaking dirty in this movie. He literally shows up just to die, just to be vaporized. That's his purpose. It's sad because in the previous two movies, it's like, okay, Cyclops didn't get to do much, but this third movie, they're gonna let him pop off. And he popped like a bubble instead. It's not really a flaw with the movie. Obviously, he never got any real attention in the first place, so it's probably fine that they killed him off. It's just a shame that they didn't do more with him. That being said, basically everything else in this movie I actually like to varying degrees, but I still like. I think this is, once again, a great showing for Magneto, where as soon as you learn about this mutant cure, he's like, they will weaponize it against us. You'll see. And what do? They weaponize it against them. And one thing I like about these movies, a recurring theme, is that Magneto, this guy right here, he's always right. Every single freaking prediction he makes, he is correct, and he is responding to it in a way he thinks is appropriate. He's a villain with a perspective, and a perspective that if I was a mutant, I would definitely be agreeing with Magneto more than Charles Xavier. He really flexes his powers in this movie. He lifts the entire freaking Golden Gate Bridge to go visit this island where this mutant Cure Kid dude or whatever is at, and I think it's awesome. And he brings this whole squad, his whole brotherhood with him. He's a leader. Dude, Magneto's the best. That's all I gotta say. I also really liked how this movie tackles the idea of how a cure would affect certain mutants. Like, yes, some mutants love their power. It's a huge part of their identity. But for people like Rogue, who can't touch anyone, that would be incredibly hard. And people like that would really want a cure, would really want something to suppress that X gene that gives them those powers. However, forcibly taking away those powers leads to questions, and I can understand why so many people will be like, no, you don't get to do that to me. I think it's all very interesting commentary. I think there's a ton of real life parallels you could look at, and when X-Men does that, that's when I think it's at its best. You also get a lot of focus on Wolverine, as you did in the last two movies here. I like him stepping up into more of a leadership role, his moral dilemmas that he faces when he's talking to Charles about what he did to psychically block Jean, and maybe there's a reason he psychically blocked Jean. You get this nuanced debate about power in general in this movie, of where even certain mutants are bigoted towards other mutants who are too powerful. It really just tells you the nature of human beings in general, is just the fear of power. When someone has something that you don't have, that's when things get scary. And while I've never really liked the character of Jean Grey that much, nor the romance, love triangle, whatever, between her, Cyclops, and Logan, I did actually like how they handled the Phoenix stuff in this movie. I don't know if that's a hot take. I don't know if anyone agrees with that. I like how powerful that she is. They just showcase how devastating she is when she unleashes her full strength. It feels like reality just starts deflating around her when she just lets herself go. The scene where Charles is trying to save her and Magneto is trying to recruit her is just so awesome, where the house is freaking exploding around them. Wolverine is trying to get there by clawing on the ceiling. It just feels so gripping. And having Jean have this multiple personality between the real Jean and then the Phoenix, I think, is an interesting angle to take things, and that's the form that is just all desire, all rage. And I think Logan realizing that a person like that with that much power needs to be taken down because they can't control themselves. And at the end, when Logan has to be the one to kill her, and it feels appropriate that it's him, I found that very powerful. I know a lot of people disagree with me. I know a lot of people don't like this movie, but for me, I thought that that was a really, really great moment. Yes, it's flawed, not perfect, but overall, I think X-Men Last Stand earns itself a B rank.
Too easy. Piece of cake.
My number 8 is Deadpool, which introduces the wisecracking, fourth wall breaking anti-hero Wade Wilson as he embarks on a quest for revenge after a rogue experiment leaves him with accelerated healing powers and a twisted sense of humor. The first Deadpool movie is a ton of fun. On paper, it's just beautiful. It's got great action scenes, it's paced extremely well, and it's a super fresh concept for superhero movies. This hard R, fourth wall breaking, Merc with a mouth, Wade Wilson, Deadpool. In 2016, we were already feeling a little bit of superhero fatigue, so it's really nice to have had Deadpool as this palate cleanser for teenagers and adults that love superhero content. Deadpool, or Wade, has this very underdog charm to him because he's not your typical superhero. He's an anti-hero. He kills people, and the X-Men are kind of trying to stop him at times. The villains are trying to stop him at times. He's kind of all on his own, and it just makes it fun to watch him and his twisted sense of morals that, at the end of the day makes sense to a lot of people, but if you really think about it, yes, they are very twisted, and it's just fun to follow people that aren't really good people, but are still very entertaining and fun to watch. I think a lot of the side characters were good, like Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead. I have the hardest time saying that. I like Vanessa okay. I don't always buy her or their relationship as much as a lot of people do, but I think it does work pretty well in the context of this movie, and especially when you compare it to the other relationships in the X-Men movie franchise. And I'm I'm a big fan of Dopinder, the Indian cab driver that helps Deadpool out from time to time. Just super funny. I like him. He's fun. For my negatives, and the reason why it's not higher up on this list, is just that so many jokes don't land for me personally. And it's bound to happen in a movie that's so funny like Deadpool and is throwing jokes at you a mile a minute that are still fresh jokes that you wouldn't necessarily hear in the MCU. But it's just bound that a lot are going to miss for me. And especially with someone who doesn't always like mass quantities of dirty jokes, because it just loses its luster at some point. I feel like this movie overdoes that. I thought the villain Ajax was pretty weak, didn't bring much presence with him, and almost died at like the beginning of the movie, so I just never felt very threatened by him. Even when he kidnapped Wade's girlfriend Vanessa, I just was like, you're whatever. And I guess my last thing is that at the end of the day, Deadpool's pretty standard. It's a hard R action comedy movie. The fact that it's a superhero movie doing that is what makes it special. That's the unique selling proposition. And when you take that away, it to me is just a funny standard action movie that I would maybe throw on every now and then, but I just didn't love it as much as a lot of people did. And that's not to say that it's bad. For me, it's not something that I ever really think about rewatching too much. But Deadpool is still a great time. I still like it, and I think it easily earns itself a B rank.
Too easy. Piece of cake.
My number 7 is Deadpool and Wolverine, where Deadpool enlists a down-on-his-luck Logan to help save his universe from complete collapse. I did a full review on this movie, so I won't spend too much time here on it. However, if you want to see my full and complete thoughts, I have a link right up here in this corner. However, briefly, I will say I thought this movie was a total blast. Wolverine and Deadpool's chemistry was great, and it was the thing I was most worried about going into this movie. However, it respected the character of Wolverine, having him play a straight man, which contrasted perfectly with Deadpool's nonchalant, non-serious attitude where he's always making jokes and being as annoying as possible, and it led to so many humorous moments in this movie. I thought that the action was very stylish, maybe not as stylish as Deadpool 2, but stylish all the same. Not only was the relationship between Deadpool and Wolverine great in this movie, but I thought that the movie as a whole did a ton of justice for the character of Wolverine, which would have been really easy to overlook, and I'm glad that they put the time in to show their love for the character. I also really like that this movie serves as a bookend to the 20th Century Fox lineup, not only X-Men movies, but other superhero movies that they did, and I'm glad that they paid homage and love to many of these superhero franchises that I grew up with as a kid. The reason that this one isn't higher is that I think out of all of the Deadpool movies, it is by far the worst paced. I think it has the worst plot. It might have the worst villains, and while it tries to subvert a lot of the MCU tropes by making fun of them and doing those tropes in excess, the problem is it's still doing those tropes in a lot of ways, and I'm fatigued by a lot of these multiverse tropes that it is doing to make fun of Marvel, but they're still doing it, so I'm left a little bit like, we're doing this again, which is sad because I know that's what they were trying to avoid, but they ended up falling into those same pitfalls by trying to avoid it. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed this movie. I had a blast watching it with my packed theater. We were all hooting and hollering at so many of the jokes, and I will give Deadpool and Wolverine a B rank.
Too easy. Piece of cake.
My number 6 is The Wolverine, which follows Logan to Japan, where he confronts both his inner demons and a powerful enemy from his past. I think my favorite part about The Wolverine is that it takes the character of Logan seriously, but it's still a fun action movie that adds to his character. I like that Wolverine goes to Japan and we get to see him in action sequences there that we wouldn't have seen in any of the other X-Men movies. That adds a unique flair and visual style to everything, and adding to that, this movie is really well shot. I think it is one of the best shot X-Men movies. There is some truly beautiful frames framing, lighting, compositions. I think that this movie is gorgeous, and I love the style that it goes for. I also think the Wolverine does a smart thing by taking away Logan's healing factor pretty early in the movie, because as we've seen in every other movie, it can make him sort of OP at times and takes away a sense of danger. And that's okay when you're in a team setting where other people can be injured and whatnot, but making it so Logan's life is on the line when he's already someone who's sort of broken and a little bit suicidal and doesn't like living as long, him having to find the will to live, and that battle between wanting to die in this case but also wanting to do the right thing and help people is a very interesting dynamic that I think this movie plays with really well. I also think this movie just has dope action scenes. The one that comes to mind is the train fight where Logan and a couple of assassins are on this bullet train and they're flying, jumping up and down, trying to kill each other. I feel that there's a lot of great train fights in movies, and this one is no exception. I really like the showdown Logan has with a certain goon at the estate as soon as he gets his healing powers back. I think it's a nice cathartic moment. And for all things said and done, I actually didn't mind the last act. Sure, it gets a little bit comic booky for my tastes, but overall I still thought it was enjoyable, and that was also a fun action scene in the movie. I also thought that the villain, which is sort of a surprise, so I won't spoil it, but I thought the villain was pretty good. This movie also has a really cool flashback opening that takes place in World War II, where Logan essentially tanks a nuclear bomb and lives to tell the tale. The reason why this movie isn't higher for me is it does center on Logan protecting someone, and then there's a little bit of a romantic element that I didn't necessarily care for. I didn't hate it. I thought the chemistry was sort of there, but it did feel a little bit like whatever. I guess we have to have one of these in here because it's a superhero movie. This movie also didn't really wow me in a lot of ways. Like, I think it's pretty solid throughout most of it, but it's not like amazing top tier stuff for me. Good stuff throughout the movie, just not great stuff. And unfortunately, another key plot point of this movie is Logan's trauma with Jean Grey. And as you probably know by now, that's never my favorite plot point. I don't really buy into the Logan, Jean Grey, Scott Summers love triangle, and the fact that this has somehow weaseled its way into my Wolverine movie makes me just a little bit sad. Nevertheless, I think that The Wolverine is a great, fun, solid time that I am going to give a B rank.
Too easy. Piece of cake.
My number 5 is Deadpool 2, which follows the Merc with a Mouth as he assembles a team of misfit mutants, the X-Force, to protect a young boy with extraordinary powers from the time-traveling cyborg Cable. I know a lot of people like Deadpool 1 more than this movie, but honestly, I think Deadpool 2 for me is just a better version of Deadpool 1. Everything I like in Deadpool 1 is mostly better for me in Deadpool 2. I think the jokes are better, the cinematography is more saturated and fits the comic book tone really well. I like the characters more in this movie. I think the villains are better in this movie. I think that the only thing Deadpool 1 does better than Deadpool 2 is that the pacing is better in Deadpool 1. I feel like that movie just breezes along, doesn't waste your time at all. Deadpool 2, there are some moments that slow down. It feels like we're meandering and it's like, all right, what are we doing? But I don't think it's badly paced. I think that it moves along well, and like I said, I just think everything else in Deadpool 2 is better for me. Going back to those jokes, I think the opening scene is really funny. That scene where his whole task force just gets brutally murdered off is extremely funny to me. I remember I couldn't stop laughing during that scene. I don't even know if I have one of those in the first movie. Deadpool's interaction with, once again, the better villain, Cable, in this movie are super, super funny. Cable is so serious and so no nonsense that it contrasts perfectly with Deadpool, who is just the most nonsense, the most silly. And this movie came together where I felt the comedy was a little bit more prevalent, but in a Deadpool movie, I think that that works better for me because the first movie was playing it just a little bit more straight, and because of that, I was getting this conflicting tones where it's like, oh, it's trying to be serious here now, but then it's also trying to be comedy, and I don't think that they blended it as well as they could have in that first movie. Deadpool 2, they got the balance just right for me, where the serious moments felt serious, but it's just mostly funny the whole time. Deadpool 2 is a great time. I look forward to rewatching it. I think that they perfected the style here for me of what I would want from a Deadpool movie, and I am going to give Deadpool 2 an A rank.
I am very turned on right now.
Number 4 is Logan, which presents a gritty and emotional farewell to Wolverine as he embarks on a final mission to protect a young mutant in a bleak, near-future world. Out of all of the movies on this list, Logan is the one I had the hardest time placing. On one hand, I think it's fair to say that this is the best movie, the most high quality movie on this entire list. On the other hand, I don't always enjoy watching it as much. Logan is a movie I appreciate a lot more than I actually enjoy. This might be a little bit of a weird comparison, but I feel like everyone thinks Schindler's List is a good movie. It's a important movie, but it's a really sad and heartbreaking movie. And when I watch Logan, I feel similar emotions, obviously not as much as Schindler's List because, you know, that's chronicling real depressing events and this is a comic book movie. For me, Logan, Wolverine, whatever you want to call him, was such an important part of my childhood. I watched X2, X1, X3 on loop. I loved those movies, and Wolverine was always my favorite character. Seeing him in so much pain and agony and suffering throughout this entire movie, where he can't even shoot out his claws effectively, is so heartbreaking. And at the same time, a very fitting end movie for the character. Wolverine doing one last job where he gets to be that hero again, and he gets to showcase what he still has in him, what he's worth. I think that is excellently done, but at the same time, it's just really sad. And I don't like watching someone that I care a lot about be in so much misery. That being said, it is shot incredibly well. I really love the Western flair that this movie has. I like how character-driven the movie is. It takes such an intimate perspective with everyone, with Logan, as I've said, Charles Xavier, his daughter of sorts, and really diving into Logan's pain. It does that really well. I find it interesting that the reason Logan's healing factor isn't necessarily as good as it once was is because the adamantium, the thing that's a symbol of his warlike nature, all of the past things, all of the horrors of his life, is what's slowly poisoning and killing him. And him having to reminisce on the horrors of his life is, I feel, a great symbolic metaphor for what he's going through in his head, as well as it physically destroying him. I also like that this is the first movie where we can see Wolverine completely let off the chain. It's rated R. You get to see him have rated R kills. They're not afraid to show you anything in here, and so I think that there is some value for comic book fans. However, there are some things that I don't necessarily love. This is a really slow movie. It takes its time. It's not trying to rush anything, and because it's so slow, I feel like casual fans might actually not like it quite as much because it takes a while to get things going. I also felt that the last act was a little bit comic booky for my taste for what this whole movie is going for. However, I still like it, and I think I understand the purpose of giving Wolverine his strength back one last time so he can save the day and be that hero. And so I don't have a problem with it necessarily. It does feel like it tonally clashes with the movie just a little bit. There's also a ton of swearing in this movie, and that doesn't normally bother me, but it just feels weird for me because of how long I've been watching this movies, and literally Logan, Professor Xavier, has never talked like that ever. And you'd think, well, maybe they would talk like that. I'm sure Logan's cursing up a storm off screen. Here he's dropping an F word in like every freaking sentence he says. And so it is just a little bit like distracting at times for me. I feel like they could have maybe pulled that back a little bit and it would have been more natural and fit in with the rest of the movies. But as a standalone product, I think it works just fine. And as I said, this movie is really good, very character driven, shot extremely well, but it's not very rewatchable because it's so sad to me. Nevertheless, I'm going to give Logan an A rank.
That was cool!
And real quick, before I get into the top 3, I'd really appreciate it if you guys liked the video and subscribed to the channel. I'm a very small channel and I'm trying to grow, and this supposedly helps out the algorithm, so if you could do one of the two for me, I would really appreciate it. My number 3 is X-Men, which introduces audiences to a world where mutants with extraordinary abilities struggle for acceptance in a society that fears them. This movie is the one that started it all. I remember watching this movie as a kid and just loving it, loving the characters, loving the X-Men. And while it's not the magical experience that it was watching it as a kid, I still think that X-Men is top tier. It has a ton to offer with its themes, motifs, messaging, and I still think that there are a ton of characters in this movie that work really well, and a ton of memorable, noteworthy scenes that I think about often. This is the one that introduced the world to Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, a staple of pop culture. Everyone knows Wolverine, and when you think about that character, you think about Hugh Jackman's portrayal of the character. I honestly have a hard time thinking about anyone that would play Professor Xavier better than Patrick Stewart. He just delivers his lines with such eloquence and intelligence, and the same with that goes to Ian McKellen as Magneto. I already mentioned Michael Fassbender's younger version of the character is a little bit more aggressive. This is a more intelligent, cool, calm, and collected Magneto that always feels like he is one step ahead, and this movie's opening is so powerful because it shows the first time Magneto ever used his powers as a Jew, where his parents are being sent to a concentration camp back in World War II. It immediately makes you understand that this is a villain with a perspective. He's been there before. He knows how human nature is. As I've said before, he's often incredibly right. Magneto is the best, and he is a top 3 Marvel villain for me. The costume design is somewhat questionable. Magneto does look pretty goofy, and the X suits in this movie are just basically black leather biker gang outfits, and I don't think that that looks particularly good in a modern standard, which is ironic because they were trying to do it to look cooler than the comic books. And I think it's funny that this movie makes fun of the classic comic book aesthetics.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
And then X-Men 97 makes fun of this movie's aesthetics.
Am I going to war or a circus?
What'd you expect? Black leather?
That it just shows how things change over time and what's cool and what's not cool during different periods of life. I also think that this movie struggles a little bit with some of the X-Men not getting the spotlight enough. Once again, Cyclops is just completely sidelined in this movie. Storm doesn't really do much either. Jean Grey gets a little bit more focus. I don't love her too much, but the characters that I like in this movie, I think do a really good job. That being Professor Xavier, Mystique, Magneto, and of course Wolverine. They carry this movie. And more than the characters, this movie just has great dialogue, great scenes that really immerse you into what is going on. I mentioned that opening scene being really good, but my favorite interaction in this movie is actually when Magneto is captured rogue with Sabretooth and Toad. They're heading out, there's a bunch of police. Magneto's just throwing cars at them, being like, yeah, you guys can't touch me, but Charles is there and takes over the mind of Sabretooth and Toad, and Charles is like using them to try to save Rogue. It's a great dynamic. It feels like Sherlock and Moriarty, while also having two friends that are doing a battle of wits and ideology right before our eyes, and it is just so well written.
Let them pass that law and they'll have you in chains with a number burned into your forehead.
It won't be that way.
Then kill me and find out.
It epitomizes the Charles Xavier versus Magneto ideological differences in a cool and creative way. Now, is the action dated at times? Absolutely. The CGI in this movie has not aged well at all. The plot is also pretty comic booky with Magneto wanting to build a machine to turn a bunch of global leaders into mutants so that they care more about mutants' problems. It does feel a little bit silly when you think about it, and when the movie's trying to say, oh, we're not silly like those comic books, we're cool.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
But to be honest, I don't really care about that, because I think this movie just has so many good moments, so many good character interactions. I also do have a ton of nostalgia for it, and I rewatch it every now and then, and I'm like, yeah, this is a really good movie, and this is what's part of the big boom of superhero movies, where people are like, superhero movies can work, and they can be good, and they can be like this. Without X-Men, who knows if we would have got Spider-Man 2002, or maybe even Iron Man down the line. I think X-Men is an incredibly influential film, an incredibly intelligent film, groundbreaking, and for that, X-Men gets an A rank.
That was cool!
My number 2 is X2, X-Men United, where the X-Men must join forces with their nemesis Magneto to combat a new threat to mutant kind from within the government. Now, I know that I said I had a ton of nostalgia for the first X-Men movie, but that goes even more for X2, X-Men United. I loved this movie as a kid. In fact, one of my earliest memories that I have is me writing in my journal about how much I liked this movie. And I do like it for similar reasons to the first, except kind of like what I said about Deadpool 2. I just think it's a better version of the first one. It takes everything that I liked about that first movie and improves almost everything about it. I think that the commentary is just as good, if not better. I think that the characters are better in this movie and a little bit more fleshed out. I think that the interactions between characters, the dynamics are better, and a lot of that is due to Magneto having to team up with the X-Men, so you get a little bit of playful banter where they kind of don't like each other, but they're doing it for a common purpose to beat Stryker. And speaking of Stryker, he's a really good villain, fulfilling the promise of exploring Wolverine's origins and diving into those horrible experiments that he had to go through to get these adamantium claws, and what was the purpose of that, playing on Wolverine's insecurities of not knowing who he is or why he is who he is. This movie has a great opening scene with Nightcrawler trying to assassinate the president, and it just comes out of nowhere. We don't know what's going on, and it's super stylish. This operatic classic Mozart music is playing, and it also demonstrates just how dangerous mutants can be. Even a mutant like Nightcrawler, who isn't necessarily like a top level mutant. I think all of the characters are better represented in this movie, except for Cyclops, who might even be worse in this movie. I think the only thing that he did effectively was push a wheelchair before getting completely bodied in 2 seconds without doing anything useful. Like, Cyclops in this movie sucks. I will give the X2 haters that. But I think Storm is a lot better. The arc of faith that she has interacting with Nightcrawler is a nice little touch. It's not deep at all, but the fact that they just threw it in there to add another layer of complexity is very nice. Jean is a little bit better here. As you can see, she's struggling with her power, setting up for X3 a bit, and I think the concern that the characters show her shows how much of the team they are and how much they care for one another. The action is also a significant improvement from the first one, and I still think it holds its own amongst more modern X-Men movies with better special effects. I think the Nightcrawler scene that I mentioned at the beginning is super, super cool. Seeing this sort of teleportation attack from all angles is really awesome. And as good as that one is, my favorite one might be when Wolverine is just completely unhinged when Stryker sends a bunch of soldiers to the Xavier mansion to kidnap young mutants, and he just goes wild. He goes to town on these frickers, just stabbing them to death, jumping off balconies, taking bullets. It's super, super awesome, and it's one of the only times we really get to see Wolverine unleash in the entire franchise. I also think the climax of this movie is really exciting, and from a spectacle standpoint, there's a ton of great moments that you get here. You get Mystique sneaking into this base and hacking into the system. You get Magneto having to save the day from mutant extinction, Logan having to fight another adamantium-boned individual. Cyclops versus Jean is a lot of fun, but it's not just the action, but the interactions that are just as good. Magneto's final interaction with Stryker is super satisfying, especially after we saw Stryker torturing him for months in his plastic prison. It's nice to see Magneto be able to get his get back. Wolverine's last interaction with Stryker, where he chooses the mutants at Xavier's Institute over the secrets to his past that he was searching for the last movie and then the entirety of this movie. There's good scenes between Nightcrawler and Storm, nice scenes between Magneto and Pyro. I could keep going. There's just a lot of high quality stuff in this finale. However, there is one thing that has bothered me for a while, and I do have to point this out. I think Jean sacrificing herself at the end feels contrived and dumb, and there was no reason why she couldn't have stopped those waves from inside the jet, and if there was a reason, they never explained it. And I just hate it when characters sacrifice themselves when it feels like there was another way. And in my headcanon, I can make it work, which is why I'm not really docking any points. I think X2 is awesome and an improvement on the first one in almost every single way, which is why I am giving X2 an A rank.
That was cool!
But my number one is X-Men First Class, which takes a stylish look at the origins of the X-Men, focusing on the early friendship and eventual rivalry between Charles Xavier and Eric Lenscher. Yes, X-Men First Class is indeed my number one. I've always liked this movie since I first watched it, and I have continued to like it more and more as I watch it over the years. Well, I've always loved Patrick Stewart's version of Charles Xavier. There's something about James McAvoy's more young, energetic, friendly, empathetic version that just speaks to me specifically in this movie. For the other movies he's in, I actually don't like him as much. This one right here, I think he just hits that sweet spot of what I would imagine a young Charles Xavier would be. He even has hair, which is nice. And I think looking at a more brash, unhinged, unfocused version of a young Eric Lenscher or Magneto is so much fun, and seeing him go through the character arc is what makes this movie so good. And their friendship and their battling of ideologies as friends where they're playing chess. And once again, Magneto is pretty much right, but Charles' point still stands where we have to prove to the world that we're on their side every single day, and we can't just act out vengefully even though we want to. Magneto choosing the path he does, where he kills Shaw with the same coin that led to his mother's death, is a super powerful moment that cements Magneto as who he is. And that is my favorite scene in the entire X-Men franchise, and it's shot really well, it's composed really well, the music is just booming on all cylinders, and that theme that they have for Magneto is super excellent, and it captures the character really well. I also just really like the plot of this movie, where Magneto is trying to seek revenge and Xavier is just trying to save the world, causing them to meet up. And you see the origins of the Xavier School, what it started as, how Xavier's process of helping these mutants channel their powers in a positive way, and different ways that they get to channel those powers in the first place. I like the relationship between Xavier, Mystique, and Magneto, and it's a good prequel for that original trilogy. This is actually one of the few times that I do like Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique. I think her playing this conflicted character that's trying to hide away her mutant appearance and try to just blend in because she's ashamed of herself, and Charles is sort of part of her feeling ashamed of herself in a way, and having Magneto come in and say, you shouldn't be ashamed, you're beautiful the way you are, which is another sort of relevant thing nowadays. I think that it's nice to see that relationship. Using her as a way to gauge that pull towards the mutant supremacy side is really, really well done, and feels like an arc that was perfectly set up by that conversation Mystique had with Nightcrawler in X2.
Why not stay in disguise all the time? You know? Look like everyone else.
Because we shouldn't have to.
I also think that the action in this movie is pretty good as well. Magneto trying to catch a whole submarine. The Nightcrawler equivalent Azazel in this movie just poofing in, grabbing a security guard, and then poofing up 100 yards high and then just dropping him on the floor to kill them is just an interesting and creative way to show how powerful a lot of these mutants can be when they're fully unleashed. I wouldn't say this movie's perfect. I don't think any of the X-Men movies are. I will never be a fan of Nicholas Holt's Beast. He's just this kind of whiny baby, and then when he fails the experiment and turns himself into a big blue beast, I was like, you know what, buddy? You deserved it. While I like the score and the music, sometimes it's just a little bit too loud and abrasive for certain scenes. I don't think it's that big a deal at all, but it did get a little distracting at times. But while there are some lows in this movie, I think the highs outweigh all of the negatives, so much so that it is my favorite X-Men movie. The characters are great, the action are great, the commentary is great. I love how they tie it in to real historic events, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I just think that it's incredibly clever. It's fun to see these characters as their younger selves and to see the origins of what they will become in the future. X-Men First Class is a great, fun, rewatchable, memorable, thematic joy, and I am going to give it an A rank.
That was cool!
And hey, that's the video. You made it to the end. Congratulations. And if you liked what you saw here, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me what is your favorite X-Men movie and how would you rank the ones that you've seen. If you guys have any ideas for rankings you'd want me to do for both older franchises and new ones, I would be happy to take requests. I want you guys to be satisfied with my content, and I will tailor it to whatever you guys are looking for. With that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you later.